what is the recipe for a great team? How do you bring people together? How do you make sure they're creating a culture of innovation?
In the world of technology, heroes are everywhere. They're overcoming disruption, delivering sustainable outcomes, and fearlessly forging the future to solve what's next. Join me, Ed McNamara, as we meet the people and businesses driving change in our constantly disruptive world. This is Innovation Heroes, a podcast brought to you by SHI. Long before Android and iPhone, a visionary company called General Magic set out to create the world's first smartphone. Despite groundbreaking work in the 1990s that impressed technology and business leaders and investors, the promising company ultimately failed to successfully bring their revolutionary device to market. But the story remains hugely influential in Silicon Valley and beyond. General Magic's epic vision would be the catalyst for some of the most significant technological advancements of our time. Welcome back to Innovation Heroes. Today's episode was recorded before we moved to our brand new studio, but it takes us behind the scenes of the General Magic story. The story of how an amazingly capable, talented, and visionary group of people struggled to sustain a company ahead of its time. To help us unravel this story of bold ideas, formidable challenges, and lessons learned, I'm joined by Veronica Miles, COO of General Magic Workshops, and Michael Stern, former General Counsel at General Magic and executive producer of the documentary film about General Magic's rise and fall. Together, we'll explore how a team of so-called magicians influence modern technology and change the lives of billions. Veronica and Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for having us. We're happy to be here.
Thanks for being here. First and foremost, for those who haven't heard the story or watched the film, can you tell us the snapshot version of the story of General Magic?
Sure. I'll try to keep it brief. Apple in 1989 was trying to figure out what was going to come next after the desktop. What was the next big thing after the Mac? They hired a futurist, Mark Pratt, from the Aspen Institute, who put together a project for something that had never really been thought of before, a handheld device that would be able to communicate anytime, anywhere, wirelessly, which would have applications on it that would let you shop, let you communicate, let you seek out information, and which would be something you'd carry with you at all times because it would become part of your life, an intimate way of managing everything that you did. Apple eventually decided it couldn't do it inside and it needed to spin it out. So I helped spin it out of Apple in 1990 as a separate company. And it actually started in a disused garage on Cowper Street in Palo Alto, a really classic Silicon Valley startup story where there were, where Bill Atkinson, Andy Hertzfeld, the key contributors to the creation of the Macintosh, and Mark started the company. It was across the street from my law office, and I used to hang out there.
It's ironic that you said, Apple couldn't do it inside, and now they're all about the iPhone now. So, in terms of why do you think that they couldn't do it inside? Is because resources dedicated to other places, politics? What's your impression there?
All of the above. They understood the desktop, but they didn't really understand what mobile would mean, and they didn't think they could make it either. And the idea that Scully and his team had was to create an alliance to take on Microsoft. Everybody understood the mistake that had been made with the desktop in giving Intel and Microsoft and Windows and IBM control of the desktop. So the question was how to bring together a consortium of consumer electronics companies who could create a worldwide standard for this communicating device. So you would use outside people. Sony would make it, Motorola would make it, Panasonic would make it. The telephone companies would create the communication system. It was to create this worldwide effort to not repeat the mistake of losing the desktop to the Wintel axis.
And not to really, literally shoot for the moon on this one, but when I saw the documentary and I saw the number of companies that had to be forced to work together, I'm like, this is just reminding me of the moon launch right now. Every single different component has got a different manufacturer that's under contract somehow. Is that fair?
Yeah, Motorola, supplied the chips. Toshiba helped us develop the A6 and the touchscreen. But again, it was an alliance of everybody who was good at something, including the international telcos. We had the national telephone companies of England, France, Japan. They were, and AT&T in the U.S. And again, they all knew how to talk to each other, and so they could build the backbone for this worldwide communication system.
So, a question for both of you, and thanks so much for that background information. But what inspired you to help tell the story of General Magic through a documentary film?
I had gotten a book contract to actually write a book about it, but the board wouldn't let me do it. They wouldn't waive confidentiality. So over the years, Sarah Karush, who was one of the two directors of the film and who had been a magician originally, and had actually, for those of you who've seen the film, she was on the crew that filmed all the archival footage back in the early 90s at the company. We would talk occasionally about, we really got to get this out. How can we do it? And we met in a bar in London in 2013 and decided, well, let's make a home movie for the magicians. Let's put together the archival footage and interview people, and let's tell the story. When Matt Maud joined the team a year later, the other director of the film, he said, "Hey guys, you're missing the boat here. This is a really important human story. It's about the crucible of failure and how people can be resilient in the face of it and do something really extraordinary. There's a lot more here than a home movie." And so over the next 4 years, we made the documentary. Veronica, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say there's a lot of great stories that start with, we met in a bar in London and then take it from there. Veronica, do you remember when you first heard about the possibility of the documentary?
Well, I actually met the team who made the film on the exact moment of their world premiere. I was working at the Tribeca Film Festival, and it was just another film coming through the doors of the cinema I was managing that day. And I remember during the Q&A, I was noticing who was on stage. I was like, Andy Hertzfeld, okay, Megan Smith worked in the White House. And I was just like, who are these people? What is this story? And I made sure to watch the movie the next day. I was blown away. Especially as like a millennial who grew up in the early 90s, and like this technology was like a part of my, like seeing this tech was a part of my life growing up. So I made sure to watch the film and then contacted Matt right away and said, I love this story. I'd love to work with you. I know how to produce screening events if you want help. So they hired me to produce a huge premiere in Silicon Valley for all the magicians and their friends and family. And it was the first time they shared the movie with the diaspora of General Magic. And we rented this beautiful old historic cinema, and we had about 1,000 people there. And it was a really emotional night. It was really beautiful. It was a reunion in itself. But I noticed, as someone I'm objective to this story and continue to be, I found it to be very healing for them to see this story that a lot of them hadn't talked about in many years be shown on screen and have it be told such a beautiful way. So it was wonderful. And I've been working with the team ever since. Basically, my role is basically to make sure this story is seen by the world and manage the impact of the General Magic story, which is what has gotten us to where we are today.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said it sounds like it was a cathartic moment for a lot of people to see that, because it's to me, it's when you watch the documentary, it's as much a people story and as a business story and a teamwork story as it is a technology story. The technology is almost like the baseline. It's like where do we go from there, and the teamwork and the hard work and the business aspects like really come through. And I wanted to ask about Michael, you mentioned the footage from the late 80s and early 90s that appears in the film. There's a couple of times in the footage that as it's being shot, which I'm guessing was on a camcorder or something based on the film technology then, you could hear somebody say that it's being recorded for posterity. I mean, there's very few times in life where you're working on something you're like, we need to actually document this right now while it's happening, because it's a big deal and we're going to want a historic record of it.
Yeah, I mean that reflects something about magic culture, a kind of hubris, right? I mean, were we really that sure of ourselves that we were going to do something so important that it was worth making a movie about, making movies about? The other thing is, it was not just us. AT&T had commissioned Sarah's crew to start filming us because they thought they might be able to use it for promotional purposes. It went way beyond that, as it turned out, and they got a lot more stuff. But that was the other impetus. We didn't have to pay for it. So.
Michael, you've walked down many different paths in life. 35 years as a lawyer, stints in journalism, an English professor, working with Steve Jobs. Can you share a little about what initially drew you to General Magic as a startup in a sea of other startups, and just give us some of your vision during your time as General Counsel?
Yeah, as an emerging company lawyer, at a Silicon Valley law firm, I did, work with a lot of startups, but I had never met anyone as compelling as the three founders and the story they were telling. Mark was such an extraordinarily charismatic visionary. Bill and Andy were so incredibly enthusiastic and so overflowing with ideas and creativity about how to do this new thing. I had never had the experience of being just blown away by the vision. And when they offered me a job, I couldn't turn it down, and wanted to be part of this moonshot. Uh, the thing that I was a technological utopian. I still am to some extent, and the idea that this thing that you could hold in your hand could connect you to the world, could connect you to other people, could even in some ways connect you to yourself. There was an emancipatory, a liberating aspect to that. It would make the world a better place, and it would make us better people. That was such a compelling part of the vision. It turned out we missed the dark side of mobile and social and the internet, and all of the bad things that have come out of it. But we were confident that we could make something magical that would really transform people's lives. And that was what made me want to do it.
So a big part of our audience is interested in like corporate governance and the law aspect as they use technology to navigate through their business. I mean, something this revolutionary on the counsel side, it's very rare you get to ask a lead counsel, I mean, the laws could never catch up with what they were trying to do there, right? So, that had to be fascinating even from a legal perspective. All this technology is happening. Are there any precedents for that? But, way back when?
No, but part of being a Silicon Valley lawyer was trying to get the new wine to fit in the old bottles. We made up the laws. We, meaning the community of Silicon Valley lawyers, we made the law up as we went along. Some of the traditional things did catch up with us. About a week after our debut in New York in 1993, when we came out of our secrecy mode, told the world what we were doing, I got a subpoena from the Justice Department saying, you've got all these competitors, Sony, Panasonic, Motorola, and the phone sitting around the same table. Tell me how you're not, dividing markets and fixing prices, because that's what competitors do. We're in the same room. So we spent the next 2 years, sending literally carloads of documents to Washington and having lots of conversations with folks in justice. And we eventually convinced them that what we were doing is pro-competitive and that we had taken all the necessary precautions to avoid those antitrust traps. But you can imagine what it was like to get, especially our Japanese customers or partners, to undergo discovery and to provide documents that they considered highly secret to the U.S. government. And my job, it was more political than legal, was trying to get them all on board and to agree that it was worth the risks they were taking. Remember, we had the CEO of Sony, the CEO of AT&T, the CEO of Motorola, and the CEO of Apple on the board of directors. And, their consigliere and legal folks were terrified, them being sued, the litigation risks. When we went public, we set the record for the number of risk factors in a prospectus. We had 23 single-space pages of risk factors. And I am happy to say that despite losing $200 million and going bankrupt, we never got sued.
Wow, that's amazing. That is amazing. And thank you for that. You don't get to ask that question enough, I don't think. So General Magic's often described as a pioneering company that was ahead of its time, and you talked a little bit about that. But what were the key innovations that General Magic developed that are now commonplace in today's technology?
It's a whole stack of things, starting with chips. The patents we got on our ASICs, believe it or not, were bought by Intellectual Ventures when the company went under. They're still being asserted. The chips were they were analog, they were combination analog and digital chips. They're still being they're still being made and they're still valued. So it was starting at the bottom with things like chips touchscreen technology. There really wasn't an adequate touchscreen. We had to invent it ourselves in cooperation with Toshiba. Um, there was no standard for interconnecting devices, so Tony Fadell and his team developed what became USB. There was no the kind of user interface that we developed where objects looked like themselves and behaved like themselves in software was also something unique. So the whole UI experience, but also the idea of applications and applications that resided in the cloud was again a new concept then. And so we created an app store. We had mobile applications, and which permitted people to do everything from make airline reservations to shop, to do their calendars. So it was an everything machine, and uh, that plus we used C++, and which again was not an industry standard at that time, and wrote an amazingly diverse and capable operating system that had to fit into a very tiny memory space. We had less than a meg of memory on the device, and that was one of the things Andy was especially good at, was writing really small code.
There's also, if that's the list of what General Magic accomplished, but there's also just someone in the film calls it a supernova. All the people that worked there and what they have gone on to do in their careers is also so incredible to look at. Like iPhone, iPod, Android, eBay, LinkedIn, all these companies. There's so many more. The magicians today are doing such incredible things, and you can trace so much technology we all use today to people who worked at General Magic. And my favorite one, which I think Mike might have left out, is emojis.
Yeah.
Susan Kerr, Susan Kerr, who did every icon on the, she did Windows and the Mac, right? She created the space we live in as computer users. She did our little rabbit logo, but she also did all the emojis. And again, we were the first to deploy them. So.
Yeah, Veronica, to your point, there's a wonderful little segment at the end, and pardon the analogy, but they did it at the end of Fast Times at Ridgemont High. They did it at the end of Animal House, where they actually tell you like where everybody goes after that. And I was like, this is so cool. Like, I mean, it was literally, they were just panning across, and they were like, CTO of Twitter, and like, Google, and all the other names that we know right now were so well represented. And I was like, that is so cool, where they just, what a great choice by the filmmakers to just pan across and just throw these, little nuggets in there about where everybody was. So great decision. As an audience member, I thought that was a great decision.
It was part of the structure of the film. It was a hero's journey, right? The kids who started out there in their early 20s, like Tony and Megan and Kevin Lynch, they saw us, the stewards of the company, screw it up, and their experience in that crucible of failure really shaped how they went on to become such superb innovators and technologists themselves. They learned a lot from what we did wrong, and that made that was the real story, was what they went on to do.
Innovation Heroes is proudly produced by SHI, a leading global IT solutions provider dedicated to making life simpler for business and IT professionals. For over 30 years, we've bridged the gap between digital strategy and execution, delivering cutting-edge technology and services to thousands of customers worldwide. Whether you're navigating the cloud, strengthening cybersecurity, or transforming your workplace, SHI is here to help. To learn more, visit shi.com/solvewhatsnext. That's shi.com/solvewhatsnext to embrace the future with stress-free, scalable solutions that you and your people will love.
Veronica, turning it to you for a second, the documentary highlights both the successes and failures of General Magic, and given your background of innovation and storytelling, how do you think this company story, challenges the traditional narratives of Silicon Valley success?
Well, I know it starts with one of the reasons the filmmakers wanted to make this film was that when people think of Silicon Valley, they often think of icons like, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, like one person. And one of the reasons they want to tell this story is that it's actually never one person. There's teams. even actually hearing Mike earlier talk about the General Magic Alliance is more evidence of that. There was just so many companies involved in this. So, I mean, I think too, I come from more the background of working in the film industry in Hollywood, but I actually see a lot of parallels with Silicon Valley, especially of how the outside world perceives it and what it also versus what it feels like to be on the inside. Whereas on the inside of Silicon Valley, things, your people embrace failure. They try lots of things. They take lots of big risks. There's lots of money going in and out, lots of money. But it feels kind of like a bubble where you can be doing that. Whereas on the outside, you think that if you just show up and breathe the air of Silicon Valley, you'll be successful. It's like you just think being in that space will make you successful. When in reality, failing is way more common than success on the inside of Silicon Valley. So I think with the General Magic story, one thing it does is it almost like breaks down that invisible wall, because you get to like come inside the doors of this company that created a lot of the foundational culture of the Valley and see these people who genuinely had this idea because they wanted to make our lives better. And I think that's so inspiring to see this kind of, I don't know, just it's so grounded to see that when, we live in such a society where there's people making lots of apps just to make money and things like that. When these people had this idea that truly wanted to make people's lives better, which traces back also to kind of the activism in the 1960s that you can really trace through the foundation of Silicon Valley as well. And so I think that's really important with the story of General Magic, is it breaks down that invisible wall, but also with the concept of failing. I think that's one of the most powerful things about this story is their product failed, but this idea wasn't a failure, and the people who worked there weren't failures. And I think that really inspires people who watch the film and who do our workshops and things like that to embrace failure in a new way. And I think that's the way it challenges not just in Silicon Valley narratives, but business and societal narratives about failure that comes from, in traditional schooling, we're told that if you fail, that's a really bad thing and you'll get kicked out of school, et cetera. Whereas the reality is that embracing failure is, I think actually Scully in the movie, one of my favorite quotes is he says something like, if you're not failing, you're not doing anything important. And I just think that's a great point and lesson. And that's one of the biggest powerful points of the story of General Magic, is how to look at failure as something helpful in the innovation journey and how to make the world a better place through embracing it.
Well, I mean, we could get really existential and say that failure is only possible if there's already a conventional set of judgments, placed on what success is,
True.
So,
That's so true.
There was one segment in the movie where it said there's engineers without managers. And I thought, like, what a great way to let the best ideas bubble up to the top. I mean, you're not pitching it to a person to get an approval to get it to the next level. You're pitching it to your peers to get acceptance because it's the best idea. And that kind of came across. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, it was our greatest strength, but also our greatest weakness. The way, the Harvard Business School people frame this as, did we fail and was it a good failure? What does a good failure mean? We didn't execute. The downside of that kind of incredible ferment of creativity, as you described it, the best ideas bubbling up, also meant that there weren't a lot of decisions made about when to stop, what was enough, what was going to be good enough, you got to ship it. There wasn't enough of that. And one of the reasons we failed, there are a lot of theories, but it was lack of execution. So that's the tension between creativity and discipline. And that's a tightrope you have to. It's really hard to walk on the innovation process, and it's a stumbling block for many companies. And I don't think we quite made it. But was it a good failure? And I think the answer is yes. Look at what the diaspora accomplished. Look at the footprint we left in terms of both ideas and the notion of mobile social and what the internet could mean. That's a pretty powerful legacy. And so yes, we failed, but we also left something behind that was worthwhile.
Yeah, you reminded me of the phrase, when you said when to stop. It's almost, I think there's a semi-famous quote: every great artist needs someone standing behind them to tell them that they're done, right? But
Exactly.
maybe, Michael, that was a good time to ask you then, reflecting on your journey with General Magic and its eventual closure. What personal lessons did you learn from the experience, and how did they impact your career going forward, and your general outlook on developing innovative solutions?
The failure itself, the process of going through it was really devastating. And I went back to my law firm. I was lucky in someone, I had an identity and a place to go back to. For many of the magicians, that they didn't have that, and some of them spent time in the wilderness afterwards. But what it made me see, my nickname at the company was Doctor No. It was always about, no, you can't do that. That's what, that's one of the general counsel's role. But what I learned how to do was how to say yes, and to find opportunities, to find the way to make things happen. Rather, lawyers are risk allocators. What I learned at Magic was to look beyond risk and to look at opportunity. And I think I became a much better lawyer and a much better counselor to startups because of that experience.
And Veronica, I would ask you the same question. How do the lessons of the film impact your own views on leadership, both within your role and on future initiatives?
That's a really good question. I've been My job for the last 6 years have been absorbing this story and the lessons of it and analyzing the story of General Magic. So I find that it's the gift that keeps on giving. You'd think I'd be tired of it by now, but I'm completely not. I'm still so inspired by this story and the people. One of the biggest ones for me is how powerful storytelling is for letting go of feelings of shame around
Mm,
failure. I think the act of them making this film and releasing it to the world is a perfect example of that. And that's a big lesson we want to bring to people is like, talk, even if it's just journaling to yourself, like be honest with yourself about how something impacts you emotionally. But storytelling can be so powerful in that way. Um, I think the importance of pivoting and knowing when to pivot when you are encountering a challenge. Um, and that every I actually really liked what you said earlier, Ed, about like the societal constructs of what failure is. The longer I work
yeah.
with this story, the more I kind of think failure isn't really anything anymore. Like to me, failure is opportunity. It's an opportunity to learn. Every challenge in life is an opportunity to learn, and that's a big lesson I've taken away from absorbing this story for such a long time. And with leadership, um, vulnerability, I think, is really important. Being vulnerable with your team, empowering your teams. I've seen that from examples from the story, especially in the film. One of the most powerful moments is when Mark Peratt talks about the impact that's had on his family life. And I noticed that in every audience, people connect with that. And I think Mark, as someone who had one of the greatest ideas of our time, being able to be that vulnerable really gives permission to the audience to be vulnerable too. And so I notice as a leader, I think that's really important. But especially listening and empowering too. I think in the story you see how the lack of management was one of the contributors to their failure, but also the lack of listening to different voices on the team, listening to the voices of the consumer. And I think that's a really important like leadership lesson from the story is that you really need to make sure you're making sure people feel heard and that you are actually listening to them and making sure everyone has a voice.
Yeah, I think that vulnerability, it just sounds like it gets exponentially more dangerous because, in order to be successful, you have to keep letting more and more people in, and then you have the investors, and then you have, all the other companies that had a stake in it, from Motorola and Sony and AT&T and everybody else, and then they're going to have their own judgment on failure. But meanwhile, this group of people still literally willed something into existence that had not existed before. So, how could that be a failure? Only by, widening the circle, going after success, can it be judged in a way that everybody else is trying to take a piece out of it, but the core is still just an incredible just innovation. I mean, it was really, really something to see, how you can create something from thin air and then have others judge it not to be as successful as it could,
Yeah.
where it was in other forms,
We talk, that's good. We talk often about the balance between hubris and humility as a big lesson from
Mm.
the General Magic story, that you need both. There was times in their story when maybe they had too much hubris and not enough humility.
So, Veronica, you're currently spearheading a General Magic Workshops program. General Magic Workshops program. Can you tell us a bit more about, who these workshops are for and how they build on the lessons from the film?
So when the film first came out, we as independent filmmakers were going through the typical process of what happens to a documentary film. We were in theaters, we were on Showtime, we got VOD platforms around the world. But what we found started happening right away was we were getting companies wanting to share the film with their teams and talk about it afterwards. So that became a steady thing that we did for many years. And it wasn't just companies, it was classrooms, public high schools, organizations, conferences, venture capitalist organizations, everyone, and around the world as well. And so we realized that we need to be offering something more than the film. And that led us to develop this idea of creating a workshop series where we distill the lessons from the story of General Magic and relate it to the work of these teams. And so right now we're focusing on corporate innovation teams, but we're going to be expanding to have this be accessible to startups, to students, anyone who really wants to learn from the story of General Magic. And we've taken the lessons and kind of put them into 3 categories. The big one that we've talked about a lot today is learning from failure. How do we learn from the mistakes General Magic made, but also things they did right, and how they embrace failure, how the magicians embrace failure on their journey. Teams and culture, how to build. We noticed too when people watch the film that they really love seeing the magicians work together and that energy they had of the passion, the creativity. People ask us, how did they build a team like that? How did they create that culture? And in this workshop, we focus on that. What is the recipe for a great team? How do you bring people together? How do you make sure they're creating a culture of innovation? And also in embracing risk more, having more open communication amongst their teams, things like that. And then building great products, building winning products, as we're calling it. But, you see the story of General Magic and they had come up with this incredible idea. We all can't come up with ideas like that, but how can we take these lessons from the story and apply that to the products that we're working on? And we really hope that these workshops will really, open up conversation, foster kind of resilience in the innovation journey, and just really inspire people. And just what we do though is we leave a lot of room for them to relate to their work and what they're working on. Is okay, this is what General Magic did, this is what they did wrong and right, but how can we apply these lessons to what you're working on today? Because what we see is that they're the magicians of today, and what we want to do is inspire the magicians around the world. And also, going back to that question about Silicon Valley, I like to say that we're kind of decentralizing Silicon Valley from the conversation. That something Megan Smith talks about a lot is that magic is everywhere and great ideas are in everyone. So we want to take these workshops around the world to inspire people in all stages of their innovation journeys, all stages of their careers, all stages of bringing their big ideas to life, and make sure it's shared. And we've just launched them this year, and they come in the form of 3-hour workshops. We kind of build these packages of innovation journeys. We can do this over the course of many months for different teams.
You said you want to take them around the world. Where do our listeners go if they want to learn more about these workshops or the film or what you're both up to? Where should they go and find you? What's the best way to reach out?
Always our website, www.generalmagicthemovie.com. There you can find how to watch the film. We're available on most all of your favorite VOD platforms right now. We're also available on Vimeo anywhere in the world to rent or purchase the film. You can learn about our workshops on the website. You can contact us through the website. And we're also, of course, on LinkedIn. You could find us there, General Magic, or myself, Veronica Miles, General Magic. Connect with me there if you have more questions about our workshop series and want to hear more about bringing it to your teams.
I learned a lot about General Magic, and I found the vision and the dedication to be absolutely inspiring. And it has me rethinking everything about what we consider a failure, especially while building and supporting a culture of creativity and opportunity. In my 27 years at SHI, we've had some ups and downs, some success and some opportunities for improvement, but it is the culture and the dedication of my coworkers that has kept me here and kept us going. And I saw a lot of that in the documentary and speaking with Veronica and Michael. And thank you to everyone for listening or tuning in on YouTube. We'll return in a few weeks with a brand new Innovation Heroes story. Until then, I'm Ed McNamara. You've been listening to Innovation Heroes, an SHI podcast.